Thank you once again, guys, for joining us for this online biblical archaeology webinar conference, or whatever you want to call it. Biblical archaeology is alive and well. For those of you who are just joining us, we kicked off the conference this past Friday, actually. And we are really excited to share with you some amazing stuff today. We've got some great speakers lined up once again. And before we introduce our next speakers, though, I want to say again, thank you so much for Besorah Institute and for all the hard work that they're doing. And we are just really grateful for the partnership that we have had at epicarchaeology.org with Besorah Institute. And if you want to know more, we are finishing up a course that we taught in the fall called Mesopotamia and the Bible. And we have taught also New Testament archaeology, and very likely in the future, probably coming up early next year. If you look out for it, we're going to be teaching another online course on some direction of biblical archaeology. So we're excited about our partnership with Besorah and all the great work they're doing. Besorah Institute for Judaic and Christian Research. And they are primarily focused in Messianic Judaism and all of the incredible insights that we can get into our faith through understanding Jesus as the Messiah through the Jewish lens. So we're really excited about our partnership with Besorah. But this conference and really this webinar is about biblical archaeology, and to give us a little bit of context for the whole reason for this webinar. And my hope and prayer and my vision is so that this webinar would sort of be a yearly event, and it would be great if one day we could actually have it in a physical location where we can actually have people to be present, and we can have a whole full conference on this issue. But really, it's to really bring the church and those who believe the scripture up to date on the latest discoveries in biblical archaeology. And is something that I stated on Friday night, and I'll just say again here today, is that the discipline of biblical archaeology has been around for over 100 years, and there was a very important date in the history of biblical archaeology, and that year is 1890. I know that goes back a long way, but that was actually the year that a very well-known British archaeologist and Egyptologist by the name of William Matthew Flinders Petrie utilized using pottery to date tells in Israel. And he used that ceramic typology dating method at a site in Israel called Tel El Hesi. And so that really is sort of the beginning point of modern scientific biblical archaeology. And of course, in the 20th century, the discipline took off, and of course, it reached the high watermark in the work of William F. Albright and another scholar by the name of George Ernest Wright. And then, of course, the Albright Wright School had its sort of pinnacle in the late 1940s, early 1950s, and then it sort of took a nosedive in the 1950s. And then, of course, in the modern period, there has sort of been a continual decline. At least it seems that there was a decline. In fact, there was a lot of debate and a lot of discussion in the late 80s and early 90s about the discipline itself and whether or not the discipline of biblical archaeology was even something that we should even call it. I remember years ago when I was a student at Mississippi State University, which is where I attended my undergrad. I studied at the Cobb Institute of Archaeology, and I became a student member of the ASOR. I was a student member of the American Schools of Oriental Research, and they had a journal, and the journal of the ASOR journal was called Biblical Archaeologist, and it was named that for years. In fact, ASOR was co-founded by William F. Albright. And so about a year later after I joined, I remember that the president at the time was Dr. Bill Deaver. Dr. Bill Deaver, of course, at the time was at the University of Arizona, and I was studying at Mississippi State. I was studying under one of Deaver's colleagues, an archaeologist by the name of Dr. Joe Sager, who both Deaver and Sager actually studied archaeology in their PhD work at Harvard University under Frank Moore Cross, who was a student of Albright. And Deaver went on to go to excavate and learn under the tutelage of George Ernest Wright, and the first site that Wright excavated was the site of Shechem. So Deaver in the early 1990s sort of raised the question as to whether or not biblical archaeology is a discipline that we need to call it. Does it need to have the title biblical archaeology? And so, in ASOR did a huge sort of survey among their membership as to should we change the name of the journal from biblical archaeologist to Near Eastern archaeologist. And interestingly, here's the interesting thing. When the survey came back, and of course, I said we should keep the name biblical archaeologist. In fact, 80% of the subscribers to Biblical Archaeologist magazine, the journal or the official magazine of ASOR, said that we should keep the name. But what did the leadership of ASOR do? They changed the name. They changed the name to Near Eastern Archaeologist. And of course, as many of you know, if you follow the whole discipline of archaeology, you know that Bill Deaver has been back and forth and it's published about whether or not we should call it. Actually, he just spoke recently at the Lanier Seminary, or not seminary, but the Lanier Library in Houston. And Dr. Deaver, who's now well into his, I think he's late 80s, early 90s, stated that his initial reasoning for separating the term biblical archaeology is he wanted to separate biblical studies from archaeology. Deaver believed that archaeology should be kept as a separate discipline from biblical studies, and this was sort of the thinking of William F. Albright, and so. But there's always been a group of scholars, although in the early days in the 1950s it was sort of a minority, and now there's a resurgence of the discipline of biblical archaeology. You have scholars who are joining together biblical studies once again with archaeology, and so this is what this conference is all about. These are the scholars that you're hearing from that sort of follow the Albright Wright sort of methodology of believing that biblical studies can coexist peacefully from or with rather biblical archaeology. So this is really what this conference is all about.
And the site that I'm going to be talking about today, this afternoon or evening, I guess, depending on where you are, is, as Ted said, a very important site, and it dates back to that period of the golden age of archaeology when these early explorers were sort of weighing out Shechem and very important biblical sites. Shiloh was one of those, because this was where the conquest came to an end, and this is where the period of the judges began. And let's be frank about it, that's where the tabernacle was erected. And it's because of the Mishkan and the Ark of the Covenant that there continues to be great interest in Shiloh today. So let me get my PowerPoint pulled up, and I'll see if I can share my screen, or actually, I think I need to do it from the Zoom screen here. Let's see.
And Scott, are you in Texas or Israel today?
I'm in Texas. I hope to be in Israel in about 10 days.
Fantastic. Well, I was going to say Texas is another promised land, right, brother?
That's right. So are you guys seeing my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
So let me go into full
okay.
Screen mode here. Yeah,
yes.
I'm going. My flights were canceled 2 days ago into Israel. I'm speaking at a conference at the end of the month, and then was hoping to take care of a little dig business. But my flights were canceled by BA. Go figure, they're having trouble filling up flights going into a war zone. I mean, who would have anticipated that? Exactly. But I backed up, and now I've got new flights going through Amman, Jordan, and then I'll get into the country that way. So one way or another, I'll be there at the end of this. So Ted, will you be here with me while the whole time, or because I'd like to know when I've got about 5 minutes to go to make sure I'm wrapping up on time. Okay.
Sure thing. I will give you some time markers.
Awesome. Okay, well, let's dig right into it. We know Jeremiah 7:12 says, "Go now to Shiloh, where I first caused my name to dwell, and see what I did there." And that's really what we sought to do in going to Shiloh. We wrapped up the Khirbet el-Maqater excavation in June of 2013, and then immediately segued into the Shiloh excavation. Most dig directors are smarter than that. They take a break and they work on publications. I just couldn't see shutting down this finely tuned army that we had when the door was open for us to go to Shiloh. And so that's what we did. Fortunately, we have been able to wrap up the Kirby Elmakater publications, and now Shiloh has all of our attention. So I invite you to go with me to Shiloh. And the question is, have we found the house of God? And let me begin with the biblical text itself. And I'm going to see if I can scoot you and me over a little bit, Ted.
Sure,
So
go ahead.
I
do the same thing when I'm on Zoom. Yes.
yeah, they're kind of cutting off my screen. All right. I just didn't want to cut you off. Exodus 31 actually tells us quite a bit of information about the building of the tabernacle and the builders of the tabernacle. We read in verse 1, then the Lord said to Moses, see, I have chosen Bezalel, son of Uri, the son of Hur of the tribe of Judah, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom and understanding, with knowledge, with all kinds of skills, to make artistic designs for work in gold, silver, and bronze, to cut and set stones, to work in wood, to engage all kinds of crafts. Moreover, now we learn about the second builder. I have appointed Aholiab, son of Ahisamach, possibly mentioned as Doug Petrovich has pointed out in Sinai 375a, of the tribe of Dan to help him. I have also given him the ability to all skilled workers. So these are two pretty amazing guys when you listen to this description. If ladies, if you were married to these guys, everything would be fixed around your house all the time. You would have it made. So we know who built the tabernacle, and as Ted said, we think we know when it was built. Let's see if I can get to the next slide. There we go. Here we see the dimensions of the tabernacle, and these are approximate dimensions because we're not positive what a cubit was. We think we know, but there's some variance. So the main thing we're interested in is dimensions, say on 2-to-1 ratios. So we're looking at 100 cubits by 50 cubits by 5 cubits, or in meters. It's proportionality of 2-to-1. And so keep that in mind as we talk about the building that we are unearthing at Shiloh. In Joshua 18:1 is a central passage. The whole assembly of the Israelites gathered at Shiloh and set up the tent of meeting there. The country was brought under their control. Why did Joshua choose Shiloh? So there are a number of things to think about with that. Number one, Joshua was from the tribe of Ephraim, and Shiloh is in Ephraim territory. Shiloh is also centrally located, and it would be easy for people to make pilgrimages from the various tribes. Joshua's hometown, Timnath-Heres, is just a few miles away to the west, and it's now under excavation by a brilliant young Israeli archaeologist, David Raviv. And so hopefully we'll be getting a lot of interesting new data from Timnath-Heres. So in my view, Shiloh was part of the Shechem city-state. So in the late Bronze Age, we have a city-state alliance or system of governance. So you have the Jerusalem city-state in the south, the Shechem city-state in the north, the Megiddo city-state, and so forth. So these people are Egyptians. Now, we tend to say Canaanite city-states, but we know from the Amarna letters, as I'll touch on a little bit later, that they are completely under Egyptian control. And that's important when we start thinking about the type of warfare that the Israelites waged. These are the people who have had them enslaved for hundreds of years in Egypt. And so I would suggest that this is an ongoing battle with Egypt more than it is a battle with these people. The American colonies were very much British before 1776, even though they were located somewhere else. So let's keep those things in mind. If Shiloh was indeed part of the Shechem city-state, then when we talk about the Amarna letters, it's going to make a lot more sense. Shiloh is mentioned many more times in the Bible, and I'm sure you're familiar with a number of those. This is me driving the first stake for the Shiloh excavation. This is June of 2013, and not knowing, this is the northern face, by the way, and so this is the area that we selected to begin excavation. The Danish had worked at Shiloh for 4 seasons in the late 20s and early 30s. Done 2 or 3% of the site that they excavated. Overall, they did a good job, but by our standards, of course, it was a bit primitive. The Israelis came along, Bar Ilan University, led by Israel Finkelstein in the early 1980s, and did 4 seasons of excavation, more on the eastern side or northeastern side. What I wanted to do was to connect what the Danish had done on one side, what the Israelis had done on the other, and open up a broader area so that we were not subject to misinterpretation. Because when we're drawing conclusions based on 2 to 3% of the evidence at the site, that's very dangerous. And so I thought if I could take the Danish work and the Bar Ilan work and then the periodic work that the Antiquities Authority had done at Shiloh, and open up a broader area, bring the whole thing down and connect it, maybe we would have 10 to 12% of the site excavated, and we would be able to draw some more solid conclusions. So when I'm driving this stake, I have no idea that I am very close to the building that I'm going to be talking about. In fact, right on the edge of it, I think. And I published an article in 2016 indicating where I thought the tabernacle would have been at Shiloh, and it was not on this spot. I thought that I agreed with Hans Kehr, the Danish director, and with Israel Finkelstein, the Bar Ilan director, that the summit would have been the most logical place for the Mishkan. I also suggested that it could have been mobile, perhaps since it's a tent, that it could have moved around seasonally, and that the whole site should be seen as sacred. But that's one of the great things about archaeology, folks, is we learn something new every day. And I wish I could tell you that it was my archaeological acumen and insight that led me to the spot, but fortuitously, or perhaps by God's direction, this is the spot that we chose. And within it, we have now remains of what I believe are the building of the tabernacle, the gate mentioned in the Bible, and a sacred deposit known as a phabisa. So let's work through here. The chronology is always important. I would say that the tabernacle is erected at Shiloh, beginning of the 14th century BC. Let's just say around 1399 BC. And then it stands there until about 1075 BC, so approximately 324 years. Now, the Seder Olam, which is part of the Mishnah, gives you a different date. It says 369 years. So in this case, the Mishnaic date is a bit at odds with the biblical date. But we can safely say they both agree that for over 3 centuries, Shiloh was Israel's first capital. It was the cultic center of Israel. And this is where people went to reconnect with God vertically and with each other horizontally. And for that reason, it's very important. Our radiocarbon dates, our ceramic dates, and our glyptic dates all point to about 1075 BC for the abandonment and or destruction of Shiloh, which, as I'll show you, I think we can now link to the Philistine destruction of Shiloh, suggested or hinted at within the biblical text. This is the famous Maraba map at St. George's Church in Amman in Maraba, Jordan. I was there just a few months ago. And you can see that Shiloh is prominently marked on the Maraba map. Fortunately, it was within the portion of the map that survived. This dates to the 6th century, something that archaeologists study because of modernity. There are many things, urban sprawl and so forth, that we no longer can see. And so we'll try to go back to ancient maps for clues and hints of site names and locations, or toponymy, how we would take modern names and attach them to ancient names. But there's no doubt about what this says. This is Byzantine Greek, but it says Silo or Shiloh, where the ark stayed. And so they were interested in Shiloh for the same reasons that we're interested in Shiloh, because this is where God dwelt. And this was the epicenter of the sacrificial system. You can see what our excavations looked like after 5 seasons. Now we've completed a 6th season, so I need to update this slide. But it's a big jigsaw puzzle. So if anyone loves a good jigsaw puzzle, boy, do I have one for you. Imagine getting like 100 jigsaw puzzles and mixing them all together and throwing away the pictures and say, now try to figure this out. You've got walls on top of walls. They're going in all kinds of directions. And we're going through, say, 12 to 15 meters of depth, 9 different strata. And so, of course, the deeper you go in an archaeological tell, the older the material becomes. And so we're carefully working through our way down to that tabernacle period, which is LB2 and Iron Age 1. Along the way, it's all very interesting to me. So we publish the Islamic remains and the Byzantine remains and the late Roman remains, and just working our way down. And along the way, we get into really interesting stuff, and we're learning about warfares and the 70 A.D. destruction and the Second Revolt destruction and the Crusader battle that took place there. All that stuff gets published because it's part of the story of what happened at the site. And fortunately, that later stuff is preserving, in many cases, the earlier stuff that is our primary area of research focus. So if you'll notice, if you can see my cursor, the outlines of this purple building, and that's what I'm going to be talking about here with you. That is a perfectly east-west building. And it happens to match the dimensions that I showed you earlier for the biblical tabernacle, at least the portion that we have excavated and what we can extrapolate at this point. Now, you guys may be sort of scratching your head and saying, wait a minute, what are you talking about, a building? Wasn't this a tent? Why are you saying that you found a building? I would suggest that we start with the biblical text itself, which is what biblical archaeology does. And we look at 1 Samuel chapter 3, verses 3 and 15, and we see hints within there. It's very clear in Hebrew, but you'll even pick it up in English, that there was a permanent building built at Shiloh. And you look at older commentaries and you'll see the commentators are saying the language seems to indicate this. So we knew that going in, but boy, was it really a surprise when we began to excavate this building. We also know from two Mishnaic passages, the Zevayim 14:6 and the Seder Olam 8, both mid-2nd century documents, they both say that a permanent structure was built at Shiloh. So we have the biblical text, we have the two Mishnaic passages, and then along comes archaeology to see if we can illuminate our understanding. So let's look at those passages. 1 Samuel chapter 3, verse 3, the lamp or the menorah of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying within the temple of the Lord. We're getting a permanent word here, not Mishkan, but the temple of the Lord where the ark of God was. And then verse 15, Samuel lay until morning, then he opened the doors, delet, the doors of the house of the Lord. So we're not talking about curtains here. We have this permanence of language. So we begin with this hint or clue from the biblical text. And then the Zevayim says, after the Israelites came to Shiloh, God forbade the high places. There was no roof beam there, but below was a house of stone, and above were hangings, and this was the resting place. So you have what this is saying is you have walls, but you don't have a roof. So a tent is going over the top. So it's a quasi tabernacle tent. Now, we just saw that 1 Samuel 3 calls it the temple of the Lord, which if we're going to take that literally, we're going to have to redefine our terminology of what is first temple period, what is second temple period, and so forth, because it does appear that we have a building here. And then the Seder Olam says that Shiloh's sanctuary had stone walls covered by tapestry. Israel worshiped in it for 369 years. Now, as I said, 324 is probably more accurate on the chronology. But again, the point is that you have walls with a tent over it, maybe even tapestries, animal skins or woven tapestries that are covering the walls themselves. So think of quasi-tabernacle tent. Here's one artist's rendition of what that might have looked like. The dimensions are pretty good. It is orienting east-west. So you have these walls, you have an entrance, and a tent over the top of it. So it's a reminder perhaps that it's God who is over us. And so we have no domestic structures at Shiloh at all in the late Bronze Age, but we know that they're there. We have tons of pottery and scarabs and all kinds of evidence, carbon dates and everything you would want, but no domestic structures. It's not until this building is built that we begin to see domestic structures built at Shiloh. And maybe this is that idea that it's a very biblical idea, like that David expresses later, how can I build myself a house when the Lord God still lives in a tent? And so they're still living in tents at Shiloh, only priests living there. But once this house is built, house for God is built, then they begin to build their own as well. So here's the things I want to run through quickly with you today. And then I don't know if we're going to try to preserve any Q&A time at the end or not, but if we do, I'm happy to field any questions. But 8 areas, beginning with the monumental building. So let's look at that. We had to go through several meters of depth to get down to our wall 10. And this is wall 10 here. It's an east-west wall. And in our end of our second season of excavation, we saw it better in the third season, and it caught my interest because it was 1.2 meters wide. It was substantial. At the time, I thought, well, that seems to date to the Iron One period or maybe even earlier. It's very substantial, and it's east-west. So that was the extent of it. Now, of course, as a Bible reader, when you know that the Bible says that a building was oriented east-west, well, that's on your radar. Any literature that we can study and learn, whether it's Ugaritic literature or Egyptian literature or whatever it might be, that aids us, that assists us. But when we're excavating biblical sites, for the most part, all we have is the Bible to go by. And when we have specific mentions that of dimensions and directionality, that's what's on our radar. And imagine Adam Zertal excavating at Mount Ebal and finding Joshua's altar and not even knowing what he had found because he hadn't read the biblical text to start with. Now, eventually it had a major impact on him, and he came to believe that that was indeed Joshua's altar. So it's always an advantage when we know the biblical text. And at Shiloh, books like Leviticus and Deuteronomy have become very important to me as we're trying to see connection between the sacrificial system and the material remains. So as we begin to get perpendicular walls like this and this, as they begin to emerge, this is a later Iron Age 2 in the rebuild of the site. So that's not there in the original. But I asked our guys to give me the graphics on the dimensions of the tabernacle, superimpose them on a drone shot, and see how it lined up. Well, it lined up perfectly at that point. And so now we have expanded the excavation across the path into area K, where the majority of our efforts will be for the next few seasons. I think we have 4 seasons of excavation left to fully excavate this building and the gate and the favisa. So when I got those dimensions and I saw how nicely it fit, I was excited by it. And I thought, well, that looks very familiar because I excavated a church at Kerbit on Makadar, and it seemed to be the dimensions. And so I took those same dimensions, superimposed them on top of that church, and look at what we got. It was a perfect fit. Now, isn't that amazing? I did not know that. I didn't know that early Christians, so this is a very early Christian church, incidentally, dating to the 4th century. I didn't know that they were architecturally conceiving themselves as the Mishkan, as God's people in this sense. Maybe I should have, because both Paul and Peter use that language, that we're living stones being built up into a temple for the Lord. But for me, this was fascinating to see that Byzantine Christians were remembering architecturally depicting who they were and drawing identity from that. Now, as I said, the deeper we go, we find all these interesting things. The single most important thing to me as the lead archaeologist at Shiloh is that every locus that we excavate can be attached to a stratum. And so you can see in this cross section what it looks like as we go down. You can see the different layers. And so everything we're excavating has to be assigned to those layers so that we track it through our protocols so that then we can figure out where those coins go, the various pottery and different finds along the way, so that we can see accurately what happened there. These are 3 beautiful coins from the 2023 season that come from the same layer. And I just published these in the Jerusalem Journal of Archaeology, Hebrew University's peer-reviewed journal, along with Devir Raviv and Yoav Farhi as co-authors. And so the 2 outside coins are Bar Kokhba coins, Second Revolt coins. We have more Second Revolt coins at Shiloh than any site has ever been found. Now, you have to understand, we metal detect meticulously and we wet sift everything. So we're not missing anything. And then the one in the middle is a coin of Trajan dated to about 117. So, there's your second revolt. And then right underneath it, we've got first revolt. And so as we're going down, we're trying to meticulously record what happened. Here's that wall 10. You can see it is preserved to a height of 3 meters. I would have never guessed that when we started excavating it, that we would have that much preservation of this wall. And in some places it's 2 meters. So it's ranging from 2 to 3 meters, which is astounding. We have no parallels in Israel for a building of this size from that time period. And at Shiloh, we have visitors every day. We have media, we have professors, we have universities, wanting to come see what we're doing and talk about it. And I was giving a tour to some folks from the IAA last year, and the director of publications was there. So I was showing him this building and the wall, the directionality, the perpendicular walls, and he looked at me. Zvi Greenhut looked at me and said, "I know what you're thinking, Scott." I know what you're thinking. I said, "I didn't say anything, Zvi. I'm just showing you what we're excavating. But I will tell you this, that if it's not the building of the Mishkan, then we have 2 buildings of the same dimensions at the same spot at the same time. And that seems a little weird to me." Now, I've not published this yet. We won't until we finish. We have to dot our I's and cross our T's, but it certainly looks like that's what we have. It's full of cultic material, as I'll show you, beginning with pomegranates. It's not all ceramic now because we also have faience ones, but the pomegranate is a motif of the tabernacle. It's the only one of the 7 sacred fruits that go into the Holy of Holies. On the hem of the priest's garments, we have bells and pomegranates, and Solomon's temple is later adorned with 200 ceramic pomegranates. And so the pomegranate is a symbol of divinity, of the presence of God. And so what do we find within the building? In 2019, we find a miniature pomegranate. And I published this with Tim Lopez in David Ben Shlomo in Judea-Samaria Research Studies. I cannot tell you that hung from the hem of Eli's garment. It may have hung from a colt stand or something like that. But I can't tell you that it didn't either. The Bible says that we have bells hanging from their garments, and within this building, we are now finding miniature pomegranates. We had a sense that maybe the Danish had excavated some and had not recognized them. And so we went back into their records. And in fact, last year, Abigail Levitt, who's now Matt Huss, who will be speaking to you guys later, she and I were in Germany last October, Denmark and Germany both speaking at conferences. And so we went back into the Royal Museum and went through the Danish collection just to re-examine and see if with new technology we can identify some things. Anyway, we were right. They had found one and misidentified it. So we also published that. And just a few months ago, within the area of what we might call the Holy of Holies, because our building is broken on 2-to-1 ratios with a perpendicular wall. So within that innermost part, thanks to good meticulous archaeology, and Tim Lopez is incidentally supervising this area, we found a miniature faience pomegranate. So if you sort of look down toward the metric end, where the word metric is, you'll see the hole there where that would hang. And so this is faience. It's like a forerunner of glass. Miniature pomegranates within this building. The pomegranate represents something important, and it's always cultic in nature.
Scott, when you say cultic, you're referring to like religious, right? As an archaeologist, use that word, yeah.
Like we would refer to the Israelite cult as just how their religious system operated. Correct.
Right. Exactly.
We are also finding altar horns. So we have a demolished altar. This was already on my radar because in one of the 5 Byzantine churches we have at Shiloh, you could see an altar horn in secondary usage. Shimon Gibson had observed this years ago. And so it was on my radar that we might find other altar stones in secondary usage, because that's what later peoples do. They scavenge whatever they can and they reuse it. Sure enough, this is what we began to find again within this building and immediately outside this building, evidence of a demolished altar. We just got the results of residue analysis from this stone about 2 weeks ago. Things move slowly in Israel. It's the Middle East. We've got pandemics, we've got wars, we've got all kinds of obstacles. So even though, we're trying to be as expeditious as we can, we're somewhat reliant on, we partner with various Hebrew university, all 6 of the universities in Israel, in their labs. And so we just got the results of the residue from this. And unfortunately, I can't tell you what they are, but stay tuned for peer-reviewed article on that.
Awesome.
Here is another possible in situ horn in secondary usage. In a burn context, here was another one. That's not the best picture, but it's another possible altar horn. Now, this plastered surface is important. This is the type of stuff that I would stay awake at night just thinking about, because it's what we call a sealed locus. And for archaeologists, this is like gold, because that lets us know that what's underneath it has not been disturbed since antiquity. And so if we can get good, clean dates on top of the floor, which we did, Iron Age 2A, so at the time of David and Solomon, then we can extrapolate what should be underneath it. And then if we confirm that, now we've got a dating sequence. And once we get an absolute date, then we can do relative dating from there. So sure enough, we go under this plastered surface, and I told Kevin Larson and Tim Lopez, who are supervising this area, I suggest that we're going to find collared rim jars under this plastered surface, which is the telltale sign of Iron Age 1. And if we're lucky and there's a destruction layer, because we archaeologists love destruction, if we're lucky and there's a destruction layer, we'll be able to carbon date it. And that carbon date is going to be about 1075 BC. In other words, that's what it should be. That's what I'm anticipating. And this is what we do, Ted, as you know, we have a hypothesis, and then we test that hypothesis, and we're adjusting them all the time, looking for verisimilitude. Well, I got to say, I love it when I'm right. And of course, I'm not going to tell you about times I was wrong, but sure enough, we did have Iron Age 1 pottery, collared rim jars, and a massive destruction layer underneath this floor. We were able to carbon date this, which incidentally, you have to make sure you collect the samples correctly, that you don't contaminate them, and that you follow your protocols, and that they're tested properly and then calibrated properly. And if all those things happen, the carbon dates are very reliable normally. They match the ceramic dates and they match the glyptic dates. So the date came back 1060 BCE plus or minus 30. And I had said 1075. So we were right in the wheelhouse of where I thought we should be. And so now we're looking for the first time at the Philistine destruction of Shiloh. Now, that's very interesting, because the Bible doesn't say that the Philistines destroyed Shiloh. They captured the ark, Eli died, Samuel leaves. Psalm 78 suggests that the Philistines destroyed Shiloh, but it doesn't explicitly state it. And this is where archaeology can illuminate the biblical text. Now we can see something that matches, and we can say that logically, this is what happened at Shiloh. Now, the site's rebuilt within a generation in the Iron Age 2A, but for at least a few decades, it is abandoned. So another look at that destruction layer. We have also found a Murex shell. Now, I realize that one Murex shell does not, is not, I can't claim that they're making the purple dye for the priestly garments from one shell. But again, we may find a whole hoard if we've already found this one, and it was inside the building where we found it. So the Murex shell matters because we draw the purple dye, the gland of this marine life produces this blue-purple dye for the priestly garments. These have been found extensively on the coast, at Dor, there's a whole factory of them, but in the central hill country, at the highest point of the land, at a biblical site, I think this could prove to be significant. So that's on our radar as well. We are also finding storage rooms. You can see these clusters. We only have these on the north of the site next to this building. We don't have them on the east or the west or the south, only next to this building. Now, why? And what do we have within these rooms? When people like Hannah and Elkanah, for example, came to Shiloh, they were commanded by Moses to tithe. And just how are you going to do that? Are you going to go to tabernacle.org and make a secure online donation, or write a check, bring cash? Well, of course, I'm being facetious, but you're going to bring commodity. And that's, you would expect then to find storage rooms. And within these storage rooms, we have dozens and dozens of very large storage jars, which again would indicate a place where they are tithing, storing the tithes of the Lord at Shiloh. So what I'm suggesting, Ted, is an inductive approach. It's not any one thing, but it's a series of things that taken together create a verisimilitude. This is, again, a drawing of those storage rooms, a nice look down into them. Here's what the collared rim jars look like when they're coming out of the ground. You can see the collar right here, from which it derives its name, very datable to the Iron Age 1 period. Everything gets drawn. As an archaeologist, we have to get it right the first time. We don't get a second bite at the apple. So it behooves us to be careful, to draw, to measure, to sample as we go. Our fortification wall, built in the MB3, is about 5.3 meters thick. It had a mud brick superstructure on top of it. So if you're familiar with Jericho, just kind of think like this. So you've got the big fortification wall, mud brick superstructure, which collapses. Perhaps, if it was an earthquake or something like that around that time, maybe the same earthquake or phenomenon, knocked over this superstructure as it did the one at Jericho. But when it did, it created a ramp because we have a glacis. And we have a beautiful section of glacis. And when we are finished, it will be, along with Ashkelon, the only sites in Israel where you will be able to actually stand on the path and see what a glacis is and learn about this earthen embankment as it goes around the site. Now, ours is of hard-packed ochre soil, and the one at Ashkelon is, of course, made of stone. Our mud brick are on the outside about 2 meters and on the inside. And so it gives us separation. This is our stratum 6. So if it is below the mud brick collapse, it's one date. If it's above the mud brick collapse, it's a different date. And here you can see the size of those stones as I'm actually sitting on the top of the glacis here. This is BBC that's interviewing me, but get a look at the size of those stones. I mean, these are massive stones. This is what Joshua and the Israelites saw when they arrived at these Canaanite cities, and it seemed very imposing from the outside. What they didn't know was that on the inside, these cities were barely hanging on. The populations were barely hanging on. Still got these big cities, but a major decline in population. And then we have a favisa, a sacred deposit on the eastern edge of the site. A favisa is just not a garbage dump. We are very interested in finding the garbage dump at a site. We archaeologists can talk trash with anyone. We love to go through people's trash, but a favisa is not regular trash. It's sacred refuse. These are the remnants of a sacrificial system that are then placed together. It's kind of like a ganisa within a synagogue. Old scrolls are taken and placed within there. So Israel Finkelstein had identified this in the early 80s when he was excavating at Shiloh, found it by accident. He was trying to do a cut through the eastern section and identified this favisa. They excavated thousands of bones, lots of pottery from the LB1B, LB2A horizon, and even found one gold piece there. Now, they weren't sifting everything, and they certainly weren't wet sifting, which we are doing, which is a game changer. So one of the things that I wanted to do, these blocks are now over 40 years old. They're unstable. They're unsafe. And they won't be much good if we're going to excavate them. We need to do it now while there's still something to learn from the blocks that were left behind. Fortunately, there was also a bit of the favisa that was left that they didn't realize as well. So our technology being so much better today in excavating these blocks, we have been able to learn a tremendous amount. In fact, we have more bone and findings, as you'll see, from the blocks than they got from the squares. And so let me show you a bit about it. This is the eastern edge of the site, our area D1. And we have demarcated this, of course, with sandbags. You can see where silos were cut into this. These are iron 2A silos when the site is rebuilt. So they didn't realize what they were cutting into. If you leave that monumental building and walk due east for 30 or 40 seconds, this is where you arrive on the edge of the site, and they deposit bones, they deposit pottery, they deposit other offerings over the wall, on top of the wall, and on the inside of the wall, creating this fabisa. Here's looking from area D. Of course, the sun is rising in the east there, and just down that modern road is where the spring is, Einseilun. But this is a beautiful place to work, and this section is what's one of the things awesome about Shiloh is you don't have urban sprawl, you don't have modernity. There is a modern community of Shiloh that's on top of the hill, but this is how Joshua saw it, and how Caleb saw it, and Othniel saw it, and you can still see it that way today. Here's a day's work in the Favisa. Now, of course, the bones are all tested. We have a zooarch on our staff, Professor Dr. Haskell Grainfeld from University of Manitoba, doing a complete zooarchaeological analysis of all these bones. So far, we have about 20,000 bones, if you can imagine this, just from this Favisa. And Jordan McClinton, who is a TBS graduate and now doing his PhD at VIU on this Favisa. So we have several PhDs being written on the site and on the excavations, which is super exciting. Abigail, who's going to speak later, is her PhD is a little broader than Shiloh, but it's based in Shiloh as well. And that's, of course, at Ariel University. So these bones are talking to me, Ted. Jesus warned us that stones can get inside your head and talk to you. Well, I've got a lot of things talking to me, pottery and bones, all kinds of things, as I'm trying to understand all of this evidence and bring it together in a coherent sort of a way. So we've got a zooarch, we've got an anthropologist, and we've got a geologist, and we've got a numismatist, and all this specialization in today's archaeology. And of course, I'm not specialized in all of those areas, but I have to know enough about them to make intelligent decisions about what we're going to do and not do, and how we're going to proceed. So this is a good day's work at Shiloh. These bones, by the way, Finkelstein had correctly observed that they were disproportionately from the right side of the animal. More right-sided bones than left-sided bones. With thousands of bones, that can't be an anomaly. There's got to be an explanation. He didn't have an interpretation. He just noted the data. And I think maybe he skipped Leviticus in his Bible reading, because Leviticus 7 gives us the clue. It says that the right side of the animal is the priest's portion, and who's living at Shiloh but the priests. And so it doesn't surprise us at all that we have disproportionately right-sided bones. Here's a look for the ceramicists in the crowd. You'll love this. This is bichrome interior, concentric circles, a telltale sign of the pottery from the early tabernacle period at Shiloh, early 14th century BC, and full of this type of pottery. The vessels are restorable for the most part, which is rare. Most vessels are not restorable. You'll find a piece of a vessel, two pieces, but here it's as if they were libations. So a drink offering accompanied the animal sacrifice. The wine is poured out, and then the vessel itself is broken as part of the sacrificial process because it has value, and then it can't be reused again. So we have evidence of the animal sacrifice, of the accompanying libations, and then other gifts that go along with them. Dozens and dozens of chalices. Just this last summer, dozens of goblets and chalices, which everyone agrees are cultic in nature, indicating a religious function.
10 minutes left.
How much?
10 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And we are finding gold. Yes, you heard me right. Wow. We have gold. And we're always, the locals are always saying you guys are digging for gold, and we deny it. Well, because gold is very rare. I did a survey of my colleagues, and only about 1 in 10 Israeli archaeologists has ever found gold, apart from a coin. Because people don't just lose gold in antiquity. And so within our Favisa, we now have 7 gold pieces within this small area and they're very instructive. And so the first one we found was a star, and we have found, for example, a pendant. This is sort of a almond or spoon-shaped pendant, beautifully gold made from the late Bronze Age. And I will tell you, spoiler alert, although I can't show you the picture right now because it's
I believe we may have lost Scott.
Okay. We will stop here just for a second, see if Scott comes back on. Thank you, Caleb. Yeah, it was right when he was getting to the good stuff. So we'll see if Scott can get signed back on here in just a minute. But really amazing stuff. We have about 5-6 minutes left anyway. And yeah, this is just amazing, remarkable things. And of course, as you know, as many of you know, archaeology is ongoing, and you know we can sort of have hypotheses about why and how things are fit together in an archaeological site, but it's not until publication until we put all the pieces of the puzzle together. And as you have seen from Dr. Stripling's presentation, you have these remarkable bits of data that all sort of point to the fact that this is very likely where the tabernacle stood there at Shiloh. And the bones are really amazing, and it would be really cool to see Jordan's research, Jordan McClinton, who's doing his doctorate now on those bones. So yeah, I'm not sure if Scott is if we lost him permanently or, but I know internet is always that's one of the joys of technology. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But what I'll do is I'll just essentially we've got about 5 minutes left, and maybe Scott can get signed back on and finish his thought. He will be speaking tomorrow. Those of you who are just signing on, those of you who are have joined us in the last few minutes, thank you so much for being part of this live webinar and conference. And we're really excited to share with you some of the latest archaeological research that illuminates the text, that affirms the text, that gives us insights into the Old Testament and the New Testament. And we're really, really excited that you're here with us. So our next speaker, actually, and I'll go ahead and sort of kind of get her kind of prepped up here. I met Abigail the same year that I met Scott. I've known her as there's Scott. There he is. So yeah, Scott, we lost you, brother.
I know I could tell when it happened.
No
Um,
problem.
do you
You
want
were
me to quickly wrap up, or?
Yes, that we would love to hear. You actually stopped when you were saying you hate to. You were going to tell us you were talking about the pendant, and then we didn't hear it. I was like, oh man, I wanted to.
Okay, so am
Yeah,
I sharing my screen yet? Let's see.
you can please feel free.
Let's
Yes,
see. Okay, here
you're
we go.
good. You're good on time. So
Okay. I saw Dr. Evans is signed in, and if I were to use his time, he would not like that. So, oh, okay. Are you seeing my full screen?
yes,
Okay. So I was talking about the gold, and I just
that's it.
was saying that we have an image of a human face from this last summer on a tiny thin sheet of sheet gold. And credit to my team for their meticulous work in not damaging this in the excavation process, but it is a beautiful human face dating back to about 1400 BC. And
Oh
so that
wow,
will one day adorn one of the final volumes of publication for ancient Shiloh. So let me
so
talk
cool.
quickly about the gate and see how far we can get. Dr. Rittmeyer, Dr. Hassler discussing this potential gate. And you see gate sockets lying around. After 5 seasons, we began to uncover these large pillars. And this last season, we also got in situ paving, Bronze Age in situ paving within this gate complex, right? So the glacis stops, and adjacent to it now we have the remnants of this beautiful gate. We put a beam in the niche in the wall, and it goes right on top of the pillar. So you can see that they survived to their original height, which is quite fantastic. And here are some of the pavers that we begin to excavate, these geometric pavers. So you can pick out triangular shapes, octagonal shapes. Wait a minute, we're not supposed to have those until the Second Temple period. But we're talking here about MB3, LB1, LB2 date, and we have geometric pavers. And then lo and behold, we began to find them in situ as well. So we had dozens that we actually were able to get in a mud plaster still in situ. So this is just going to blow people's mind. Fortunately, Frankie Snyder is part of my team, and she is the expert on geometric pavers from the Second Temple period, and she's licking her chops to solve this riddle as well. Here's a good look at this gate complex as it's beginning to open up for us. This was under 5 or 6 meters that we've excavated through to get down to this point. When people go to Shiloh in the future, they're going to be able to walk through these buildings. And so it won't just be going to the site because it's a really cool and important ancient site, but they're going to be able to see these buildings in this gate complex. And I think it'll be really, really meaningful. Here's how I interpret the gate complex at this point. You have an outer gate, an inner gate. We hope to be able to get more clarity on how they entered into the city in the coming season. And real quickly, I'll just give a teaser to this because I'm publishing a peer-reviewed article on Elamarna 288. And I've been saying that Shiloh is only mentioned in the Bible, but lo and behold, it appears that it was also mentioned in Elamarna 288 as the site of Silu. Turbasu was slain in the gate of Silu by the Habiru. Well, if the Habiru are, as I have and others have argued, were the biblical Hebrews, that's not to say that all Habiru were Hebrews, but the ones that are invading Canaan certainly were, I believe, then the argument that has been made by Albright incorrectly and then followed by other scholars that Silu is a fort down in Egypt just doesn't make any sense. Why would Pharaoh need to be warned that a fort in Egypt was being seized by the Habiru? This letter is from the king of Jerusalem, who's writing about Canaanite sites. He writes about Lachish here in Jerusalem and Megiddo. That's his world. And so in my research, I went back and found that lo and behold, Conder and Kitchener, when they read 288, when it was first found, they said it must be Shiloh, it must be north, but that has been forgotten to memory. Flinders Petrie did the same thing. He said it's got to be referring to a site north of Jerusalem. So long story short, I was grappling with the linguistic issue. Why doesn't it say Shiloh instead of just Silu? And so I was looking in all the cognate languages to see if I could find a clue to this. And lo and behold, guess where I found it? It was in the Bible. And in Joshua chapter 12, we read this amazing story of Jephthah and a battle that takes place in the Transjordan. And when the men of Ephraim, which is Shiloh, when the men of Ephraim wanted to cross back over to Ephraim territory, they had a test. And they said, you must say a certain word. Do you remember that what that word was? You've got to say Shibboleth.
Yeah.
SH. But if they couldn't pronounce the SH, this is Judges 12, and they said Sibboleth, then they knew that they were from the tribe of Ephraim. So what does this tell us? There was a dialect of Hebrew being spoken at this time in the region of Shiloh in which they could not pronounce the SH sound. Now, isn't that amazing?
Wow.
So here we have, when the king of Jerusalem had heard these people refer to what we would call Shiloh, he had never heard it with the SH sound. He had only heard it pronounced as Silu. And Ted, my friend, that is biblical archaeology at its finest.
Fantastic.
And so I know we've exhausted our time, and I think I've pretty much covered all that I wanted to cover. So thank you for allowing me to kick off the conference, and look forward to participating with you guys.
Dr. Stripling, thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excellent.